Hello everyone, it's my pleasure to be here. First, I'd like to thank Professor Frederico for the invitation. It's an honor to be in the entomology seminar. I'm a plant pathologist, as you know. I'm from the Department of Phytopathology, and I'm also the editor-in-chief for the journal Tropical Plant Pathology. It's a scientific society journal by the Brazilian Society of Plant Pathology, but I'm also the co-founder of this initiative called Open Plant Pathology. And I'm here to talk in this afternoon about open and reproducible research, why and how to embrace. That's the overall an overview. The key messages I want to address in this talk is what is reproducible research, some definitions about the topic, why to engage, why is it important to, what is happening in terms of reproducible research nowadays and why we should be concerned about it and engage ourselves, and what is necessary to become a reproducible researcher. Let's put it in a very simple way, how to make our research more reproducible and open. Let's have a look at this research cycle. The main outcome of our research is the scientific article. The scientific article is the way we are evaluated, we are judged by our peers in terms of the quantity and the quality of the research we produce. But much more than that occurs, there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes until we get the results and the manuscript submitted to the journal. First, we need to have our idea and we need to register that idea, a research proposal, a project. So if you are a student, you need to produce a project, which is the first step in your research. If you are a researcher, you are applying for a grant, for example, you need to register and you need to submit that project to your peers for evaluation, to check the merit, if it has merits for funding, for example. In the research, during the process of the research itself, the cycle is put in a simple way here. We run experiments and we get the data. We analyze that data and we communicate the findings. That's the basic cycle that occurs several times repeatedly. And by communicating the findings is the last step in the research process. But a lot of different things occur and a lot of products, let's put that way, we produce during the research. We produce the data. The data themselves are a product. Data have value. The analysis that we conduct using a software that we develop, or we use a different software, we adapt, or the code that we generate to analyze the data, that's something that has value as well. So there's much more. And reproducible research is a way to make this all this process executable by other people. So let's define open and reproducible practices in research. First is the open access. We want to provide readers and our peers with access to the data we produce that is accompanying our scientific article, and also the codes and the protocols. So by sharing the data, the protocols and the codes, that research is going to be reproducible. Another researcher can get the data and get access to the same data and use the same analysis to get the same results. That's the definition of reproducibility. That's different from replicability. Replicability in science is the situation when we get different data, the same analysis, but with different data, the results are replicable. Now, usually what we do during our research process, what researchers do in this field of study is independent research. to generalize. So reproducibility, on the other hand, it's the condition that we need to provide any researcher with our data and the same exact codes that we use it in order to reproduce. Okay? So that takes a lot of effort. So it's not only the idea of sharing the data, any kind of data or in any way. There's a proper way to prepare and share and document and store the data and the codes. That takes extra effort. Is it worth it? Why you should invest more time if that is not valued, if that's not important, if the most important outcome of my research is the scientific article? So it requires organization, documentation, and sharing openly. And this requires efforts that I'm gonna show you later. But why is it important? Why is everybody, not everybody, but portion of researchers concerned about that? And why are science in general concerned about reproducibility or the lack of reproducibility in science? If you look at some journals nowadays, they have different policies for data sharing. When you submit a manuscript to a journal, they have different policies. For example, there's the type 1, data sharing and data citation is encouraged. The type 1, it's like nothing. It's not mandatory, they do not require anything. You just submit your manuscript without the need to attach any data to it. The type 4 is the opposite. It's mandatory. So it's required from the authors to share their data together with the manuscript. We need to provide this evidence of data sharing, and peer review of the data is required, is the maximum level. So you cannot publish a manuscript, a paper, without the data. And the data need to be well prepared, documented, and stored in a way that it's accessible, findable. The type 3, it's the most common nowadays in the journals, which is the data sharing is encouraged in statements of data availability. So the DAS, it's the name of this, the acronym for the data availability statements. If you look at the sections of some online articles, you see this right after methods, you can have a section on the data and code availability. And this usually links to the supplementary information of the manuscripts. But let's see some examples of data availability statements that are most common. Number 1, the data sets generated during our analysis during the current study are available in the repository. That's number 1. It's really a good one because you prepare your data and you store the data in a way that is findable. It's permanent. It's definitive. You are not going to lose that data. Instead of storing the data in your computer, you are storing the data on a server. The data set, the number 2, the data sets generated during or analyzed during the current study are available from the corresponding author on reasonable request. That's something intriguing. That's the policy number 3 that encourages the writing of the statement, but it's not mandatory for the authors to share the data. But instead, they have the option to say, they opted to say, well, the data can be available if you ask me. So only if you ask me the data, I will consider or not your request. So it's not there. The data are not there. The data are stored in the researchers' computers. Or the number 3 is another example. All the data generated or analyzed during the study are included in this published article. That's the most common way that I've seen recently when the authors share the data as a supplementary. You can attach, you can add as a file, like an Excel file with the data, for example. I think it's the most common. Any kind of spreadsheet. Or there are some other examples here, but it's important to mention that not many data sets are promptly available or can be shared. For example, some data which contains personal information from people, or in the health studies, in the health sciences, there are some kind of sensitive information that could not be delivered to the public. So there are situations. There are other situations where the sponsor or the donor do not allow sharing of that data, which is weird, but that can happen too. Or the data cannot be used because the researcher, I think that's the most common, the researcher thinks that by making the data available for others, researchers will get the data and use the data to produce another paper. That's about science. That's what science is about. It's important to share the data and to share the findings, and because they don't want to share because they think they would be stolen by other researchers. These researchers working with public data, they are called data vampires by those people. So why to embrace in data sharing in reproducible science? If you look at the last universal call from CNPq, there is this 5.2.3 item in the call that says that, well, we are going to pay, it's allowed to pay the publication open access using the research grant. That's one point. That's not the point of our talk. We're not talking about open science in general or open access. We are talking about data sharing. So 14.3 here states that the research, the outcomes of the research, including the data, should be deposited in and all the supplemental material related with the research should be deposited electronically and in the public access. So that's interesting, because something that is happening now is you're not sharing the data because you want. You are required to share the data because the sponsor, the institution, the entity that is going to provide you with the grant is requiring that. And so that's a great advance in my opinion, because you need to do something. You must share the data. So something needs to change. So at least your mindset needs to change. What is the status of data sharing in my field? I brought some information. I think that would apply to entomology as well. We collected a lot of data from different journals in a series of years until 18, from 12 to 18. We screened 300 articles and we checked if the articles were sharing or not the data. And this is the number of journals classified in applied or more fundamental. And we found that most of the articles do not have the paper. They do not share. Only a tiny fraction, which 10%, share the data openly. And most of the data in those articles, they are shared as a supplemental material and not as data properly stored in a repository. And that's really rare to find in our field. I think that would be the case in entomology as well. I'm not aware. I did not do any research on that, but I think that's general. The truth is, researchers are not willing to share the data unless, and this is important, unless it's mandatory. And with the calls and with the donors requiring that, I think something is going to change. We may be able to see these numbers increasing in the future. Here, if we want to embrace data sharing, we need to know how to do it. One way is not share, so we keep the data closed here. Or the other way is to use to prepare in files. Can be a local file in your computer, could be a file in the cloud, but the idea is that you're going to store, properly store. That's the best way, if you store the data in a repository. I'm going to show you some examples later of some repositories I have constructed, I have built with the data from my research. So the main advantage here by using those general purpose repositories, there are some site-specific, field-specific repositories that you can choose. For example, DNA data or biological data. There's taxonomy, some other field-specific repositories, is that you get the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier. That's the most important because that makes your data findable and accessible. Another example, when we run experiments, is that we can opt to share the protocols. There are some websites now that are receiving the protocols. For example, you develop something that is new, or you want to document a step of your research, and you want to make that reproducible. More information, because the size of the paper, you cannot do that. So you document and you explain better the scientific protocol, and then you store that, and that you generate a link that will be associated with your paper. That is protocols.io. This one, for example, they just signed an agreement with a Springer. When you submit to a Springer, some of the Springer journals, you can have the possibility to submit simultaneously to protocols.io. That's interesting. It's not as common as data sharing, but sharing of protocols is something that is occurring now in scientific scholarly world. And when we analyze the data, we need to generate code. We can opt to not open, to just keep the code with us, or we can prepare files and properly store those files that we prepare on repositories. Of course, that depends on the kind of software we are using, and I'm going to show you later some options of the best tools that we can use to make our research more reproducible, because some of them it's impossible. We cannot reproduce the number of clicks that we do in a software, for example, but we can reproduce code that we write. Okay, so that's the concept of Research Companion, which is the collection of the package with all the outcomes of the research, including the data, the protocols, and everything that we produce, that is packed in a way that we can share. When to communicate the findings, we can make it closed. I mean, you can simply not share, opt to not share, not present an abstract, not submit an abstract to a meeting, not give a talk, not present a poster, because sometimes you are not allowed to do that. You are conducting a research that is paid by a sponsor, there is patent involved. And that's justifiable. It's justified because you cannot share the data. But remember, when you present an abstract, you are early sharing your preliminary results. When you give a talk, you are sending a message that you are working on that topic. When you present a poster, it's the same thing. And you can properly store. So that's an outcome. The abstract, the talk, the slides, the poster, the data, they're all files. So they are all part of the Research Companion that you can properly store in one of these repositories and get access. You can have a manuscript. You can opt to not publish it as open access, or you can opt to publish as open access if you have the resources to do that, or you can opt to publish a preprint. I'm going to talk more about preprints later, but a preprint is the manuscript, is the version, it's your version that is submitted to the journal. The difference between the preprint is that the preprint is not peer-reviewed. So why to do that? Why is it important? Why is it a good practice within the umbrella of reproducible research, because a preprint will give early access to your research. And if you combine your preprint, which is openly accessible, and with open data and open code, you have everything available to for someone to reproduce your research. Even if you, I'll give you an example myself. I publish papers in subscription-based journals, which is, they are not open, so people do not have access to the paper. But so in those cases, in all cases, in my case, I produce preprints. So what is the advantages of the preprints? You first you get the credit. It's findable. It's something you send a master. Well, I'm working on that. I have a manuscript here that's been under evaluation in certain journal, but I just post somewhere. It's not the journal. I post in a repository. In biology, the most famous, I think the oldest server of preprints is the bioRxiv. So the bioRxiv is where you submit, you create an account and you upload your manuscript and you get a DOI, so it's citable. There is the agriarchive and so many others. Another advantage of the preprints is that you get feedback. So it's early access, somebody is going to read and can make comments about that. And you can review that, revise that your manuscript or your preprint and upload again. So you can have different updated versions of your preprint. And there's a study, finally there's a study showing that if a paper has a preprint associated, the number of citations increase. So in some areas in bibliometrics, they are associating the preprints with increasing the number, with the impact, which is measured by the number of citations. So here are some examples of servers where you can post your preprint. I'm a big fan of this one, Open Science Framework preprints. That's where I post all the preprints from my laboratory. Every paper I submit, I firstly, simultaneously, I submit. Ideally, I should do that before, so to get feedback. But it's not so common to get feedback on preprints. So I submit the manuscript to the journal, and at the same time I submit to a preprint, and it's going to be discovered by someone because they are indexed. These preprints are indexed by Google Scholar, for example. Here's an example of a preprint that we posted in our laboratory in bioRxiv, and you can see that it's the same title, the same thing, the same authors, and the same content. That was made available before the publication, before the formatted version by the publisher. And even if you go back to the bioRxiv now, you can see that it's explicit there that now it's published in Pathology. So it's allowed that. The journal allows the posting of preprints. It's okay to post a preprint. A few journals, they do not allow posting a preprints, or you cannot, it's allowed just if you post a preprint before you submit to the journal. And actually I can update after the paper goes through peer review. I can modify, I can revise the manuscript and then update my preprint. That's possible too. To give you an example of how accessible and findable are the preprints, here's an example of my Google Scholar profile. You can see two preprints, OSF preprints, that was caught by Google Scholar. And if you have a Google alert with some of these keywords, you're going to receive in your email a message saying that Emerson Del Ponte published the paper. It's not a paper published, he posted a preprint. So you can get access and read that work and judge yourself and evaluate yourself, and you can make comments on that paper. So it enhances the visibility without any question. That's one of the major advantages of posting preprints. So do you want to change and embrace reproducibility? Here's the most important message of this seminar, I think, is that we need a lot of learning or unlearning things, and it's challenging because we need to move from a situation that is comfort to a situation that's not so comfort. Let's put it that way. We need to know about technology if we want to embrace in this new routine, in the new paradigm of reproducible research. You need to learn a lot of different tools that were not available before. I mean, there were different ways of sharing your data, like a supplemental. All the dissertations and theses, for example, that we produce is a document. We have the supplementary section with all the data. So that's something that's not new. What is challenging is that there are better ways nowadays to embrace reproducibility and do a better job in terms of facilitating others to reproduce our research. So we talked about learning new things, and I know that there will be a learning curve if we want to embrace reproducibility. And we talked about technology and about software too. And let's start with the basic level, which is the level number 1. To make your research reproducible, that's fine if you are at the level 1. You have an article, you post a preprint to make the article accessible immediately without any cost. And then you prepare supplemental material and you zip or compact that files and add to your manuscript, to your paper, and submit. It's important here, not only in the submission, the last revised version, but it's important to submit all the materials produced during your research for peer reviewing. That's very important, and there's something that's a tendency that is becoming very frequent, at least in my case. When I review papers, I like to see the data, I like to reproduce that research. I'm interested in some of the decisions that the authors made when they analyzed the data, for example. So if you go to number 2, you can host the protocols, the data, and the codes in a repository and post a preprint. And that's level number 2. And the level number 3, you have a preprint, your article, and the preprint posted before your article. And you have this research companion with all the raw data, the clean data, and analysis fully reproducible. Everything is cleaned and documented in a way that everybody can reproduce that research. Okay, I'm talking about reproducibility, and what is Emerson doing about that on reproducible research? I engaged and I engaged myself in reproducibility in science a few years ago. And then I decided that every paper, if possible, from my laboratory, I would provide all the data, make all the data available, and the codes and everything, and produce research companions that would allow anyone to reproduce my research. And then you can find at my this address, the Open Science Framework, the homepage of my profile. You can see a lot of projects that I have. Every project is associated or not with a paper. In every paper we include this information about where and how to reproduce your research, where to find. So it's and when we submit a manuscript for peer review, we submit all the links with all the data where the reviewers can find all the data and the codes to reproduce that work. There are so many where to host the data. There are generalist repositories, and some of them, most of them are free, depending of the. I have some examples. Open Science Framework, which is the one I use, is free of charge. There's a limitation, 5 gigabytes per file. Multiple files can be uploaded. So it's a very important, very good option here in terms of reproducibility. And Zenodo is another one. So there's two one. There's Dryad, but it's paid. It's not free. They have so many options here to choose from. And I would like to finalize this talk stressing the importance of learning another language, which is a code, which is software, computer language. In order to organize our research and to analyze the data, we need to do a very good job in terms of analysis of that data. And that's not because the job is not better because you are using a software, but it's because by using a software that allows you to document your analysis, you are facilitating for the readers or for anyone who is interested in that research to reproduce that finding or to reuse that piece of code. I think that's one of the very nice benefits out of posting preprints, is that people can reuse that code. Not only interested in reproduce my research itself, but to reuse that code for other things. And you can stick with the Excel forever, or you can choose a scientific plot like smal software to produce your graphs. But I'm very sure that if you use a software like R, you're not going to go back to any other of these, the click of the mouse software, because you are going to produce something that can be entirely reproducible. Not only the reproducibility is not only good for others, it's good for ourselves. It's a cultural thing that we need to, everything that we do during the process of our research, we need a documentation, we need organization, we need to have our folders in a proper way that we can find. We need to organize all the files, we need to get access to the files, especially when we are working in large teams. We need a lot of organization, so we need the technology to help us, and there's a lot of options out there. I'm talking about R software, but it could be another language like Python, which is another one that has evolved a lot in terms of facilitating reproducible research. And with that, I would like to thank again for the invitation. I tried to cover the very basic aspects, and I hope you have questions and we can expand and talk more about these topics, some questions that you might have about reproducibility in science. Thank you very much.